Comic Book Savant, episode 311.
I know this. This I know. All that I have, all that is me, resides inside my poetry. And every time I write a rhyme, it might be the line that sets mine free. And also, I know that I don't.
Welcome to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This week, we're going to go back and do something that I haven't done in quite a while, which is a Trade Your Pick episode, which, if you're not familiar with the podcast, I used to do a monthly feature. It used to be a built-in. I would do at least one of these a month where I would do a poll, would have listeners vote on which book out of a selection of 4 or 5 books that I had in my collection, trade paperbacks or collected editions, that you would vote on. And we would kind of do a book of the month read along, and I would do a review episode. I've gotten away from doing it. It never gained the popularity, or I got the participation that I wanted to get from it. But I kind of still do it in this format. When I get a chance to read particular collected editions that I have in my collection, even though I switched over primarily to all digital, I still have multiple collected editions that I gathered that I love the look. And on Instagram, I posted how my office used to be set up when I still had tons of actual comics and collected editions and things on the shelf. And I love the fact of having like a literal comic book library to go just pick something off the shelf and just grab it and read it and, just get kind of carried away and have that freedom. It kind of converted, like I said, into more of a digital thing now. But I still like occasionally doing reviews of trade paperbacks. A lot of us don't have time to keep up with all the single issues of every series. So a lot of people only buy trades nowadays. So I thought it was a cool way to keeping that original idea. That was the hook. When I first started off podcasting, all my mentors were like, every show has to have a hook. So that was the hook that I kind of brainstorming with my different mentors, we kind of came up with this kind of twist on book of the month. Like I said, it never fully worked out the way I originally planned it to be. But it was still something cool that I like to keep homage to of the original idea of the show, though the show has morphed so much over the years. So it's still kind of around in this loose leaf form, but it's just basically kind of a book review, basically for collected editions, is what the essence of what Trade Your Pick has become now. But before we get into the review itself, as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my friends over at the Comics Podcast Network. If you like this podcast and you want to find more comic book related podcasts, go over to the Comics Podcast Network. You can find them over at comicspodcast.com. There are literally hundreds of different podcasts listed there. If you have an interest in a particular character or a particular team or even a particular publisher, there are comic book related podcasts there that you can find. It's a great gateway or portal to find additional shows across the board in the comic realm. So if you have a moment, stop by the Comics Podcast Network. Again, it's comicspodcast.com. Support the creators there. If you do try a show and you enjoy it, take time. Like, I don't think sometimes listeners know how much a tweet, email, if you can email with some feedback or just saying, hey, I like the show, means to a creator on the opposite side. So if you have a moment, definitely do that to let them know, hey, I heard about, you from the Comic Podcast Network, thought your show was awesome. Just, it only takes a second to shoot a little email like that where you just say, hey, great show, enjoyed the show, or what have you. It means a lot. And last but not least, I'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor, which is always at InStockTrades.com. One of the best places you can go, bar none, when you're looking for any kind of collected editions, be it Marvel Essentials, Omnibus, Absolute Editions, you name it, they pretty much have it. And I have to say, from personal experience, I find about 80% of anything that I'm looking for, I have found through InStockTrades.com. And sometimes if it's something that you can't find, if you reach out to them and say, is this something you can get, they will respond back to you and let you know if it's something that they could order for you or not, which is awesome. But definitely, if you have a moment, they have discounts as low as 35, 42, and even 50% off with their deals of the week. Any orders that you place that you hit $50 or more, you get free shipping if you're a U.S. customer within the U.S. If you are not, you still get all the great savings if you're an international customer. And they have some of the most competitive international shipping rates around. So you don't get that free shipping if you're an international customer, but you still get the great savings, and you have low international shipping rates. So if you have a moment, check out InStockTrades.com. Let them know you heard about them here first on Comic Book Savant. And again, that always helps me out on that end with the supporting of the show. Now, and with that being said, this book that I'm reviewing for Trade Your Pick this month is Star Wars Obi-Wan and Anakin trade paperback. You can actually get that if you don't already own it. You can get it at InStockTrades.com. It retails for $16.99. You can get it right now on InStock Trades for 42% off for only $9.85. So that's a great deal right there. If you like the review and it's something that you want to check out, you can get it for under $10 on InStockTrades.com. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And I will make sure that I will put on the website and the show notes a link to the book for you guys. So again, we're talking about Star Wars, Obi-Wan, and Anakin. You know, we've known Marvel has been knocking it out of the park recently. You know, Disney owns Marvel. It's, Lucasfilms. And it's, it's been about 2 years now, I think, since the whole initiative, because it was leading into Force Awakens coming out, and Episode 8 comes out next year. So it's been about 2 years or so now since, the Marvel Publishing Initiative took over handling the Star Wars property. And I have to say, across the board, it has been really strong. They've had a lot of good, books. I've talked about, Star Wars. They had Darth Vader, and they've had a ton of different miniseries. And I was really stoked about this when I first heard about it. You're filling in some more backstory between the whole Obi-Wan and Anakin. So I was really stoked when this was announced. I'm going to talk about more in detail when I get into the meat of the actual review. So again, the title is Star Wars Obi-Wan and Anakin, published by Marvel, retails for $16.99, written by Charles Soule, artwork done by Marco Checchetto, which I loved from him, and Greg Rucka's Punisher run from a few years ago. That's when I first saw Checchetto's artwork. Colorist is Andres Mosa. Lettering done by Joe Caramagna, and this trade paperback collects Obi-Wan and Anakin 1 through 5. It was a 5-issue miniseries, and the breakdown as follows: before their military heroism in the Clone Wars, before their tragic battle on Mustafar, and many decades before their final confrontation on the Death Star, they were Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and his young Padawan Anakin Skywalker. Now join them a few years into Anakin's Chosen One training. Teacher and student have grown closer over time, but it's been difficult. It's been a difficult road, and things aren't about to get any easier. In fact, when they're called to a remote planet for assistance, the pair may be pushed to their breaking point as they find themselves stranded on a strange world of primitive technology and deadly natives. Will they be able to save themselves? When war breaks out around them, master and apprentice will find themselves on opposite sides. The premise sounds okay. This was it was kind of a letdown because of the fact that they kept them separate, just like it says in that breakdown. I think so much of what we've seen, I think the Clone Wars television show did a better job of, you actually saw them together, and sometimes they had opposing viewpoints, and we've seen, you know, enough of that. I would have liked to have seen Obi-Wan more in an actual teacher role, and Anakin being accepting to that. It always seemed like in the beginning of the series, it seems like you're seeing it a little bit, just far as Anakin being less defiant to anything that Obi-Wan is saying to him. And but then the circumstances, like they say here, with the circumstances of the story and the events of them, they're going to answer this distress call soon as they land, because of interference on the planet. Their ship crashes, they're stranded, and they're caught in the middle of this war. And it's kind of cliche because it's like the new breed versus the old breed, and they're trying to eliminate one another, and it's kind of symbolism, and it's kind of to avert of symbolism of their actual story. Artwork's great. I mean, Charles Soule, he's, you know, a really good writer. I haven't read a lot of his stuff. I've read some of his, you know, Marvel work before this, like a few issues here and there. I'm not super versed in his writing. The few issues here and there that I've tried before going into this series, I think I read the first one or two issues of his Lando. He did a Lando Calrissian miniseries that I really liked the first issue. I think first issue or two. I reviewed it on a previous episode of the individual books. So I've only had a spattering of his writing. He's, you know, written for DC, Marvel, some independent publishers as well over the past like 5 to 7 years. It's just the books he kind of writes are kind of out of my range, my normal range of things that I follow. So I'm just getting, you know, you have to get acquainted with a writer to really home in on their style and see if it's something for you. This is not the best thing. Like the what I read with the Lando, the one issue, I want to say it's like the one issue that I read of that, and a few other books that I tried, they were like number one issues. I liked better than what I got from this particular this series. It was a little too paint by the numbers. It was too much of what you've already seen between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and I wanted something a little different, something a little more nuanced. And it was lacking in that realm. I do like flashback sequences that Soule decided to do with Anakin, where you see the onset of Palpatine's manipulations and machinations towards him, you know, after he reached Coruscant and was going through his training, and him observing him in a kind of very strange way. I mean, I guess it was covered by the veil of, you know, this young kid did save my home planet, though we all know Palpatine could give two cares about anything that ever happened on Naboo. It was all just a part of his grand plan, and you know, how he truly manipulated stuff. But I thought it would have flagged someone else, anything or anyone as strange, how he took so much interest in this young boy, and it kind of went unnoticed. Like, why is he? You know what I mean? It just seems strange to me that no one picked up on the strangeness in that. And, you know, you saw little secret meetings and ways that Palpatine was just a master manipulator, and how situations that he purposely set up to have Anakin test Anakin's loyalty and his gullibility to be able to easily be pushed in things, or where Palpatine could not force him, but easily manipulate him to do his bidding, which if someone's addicted to power and you find someone that you can easily manipulate, or they're just so into you for whatever reason, where you can easily just say your wish and they abide by your wishes, you know, my command, and you kind of blindly follow, is addictive to some people. And Palpatine power came from that. He manipulated so many people, and, you know, he manipulated and set up a whole war for no other reason where not even thousands, millions of people, droids and all that died just so he could become and rise into prominence and power for no other reason. He was in the forefront of it all, safe where he was, pulling the puppet strings to everyone just to do his bidding to put him in power. And he never had to lift a finger or really get his hands dirty in any of it. It was just him thinking 5 steps ahead of everyone else and putting the pieces in place and let them do the work for him. And I think that was the biggest source of Palpatine's and the Emperor's power was manipulation. He thrived off of it. He loved it. It fed his ego, which gave him more power within the dark side, and which made him such a formidable enemy at the end of the day. But those flashback scenes worked. I wish we would have gotten maybe some more background to Obi-Wan. I think the big misstep with this is that even though it was called Obi-Wan and Anakin, it didn't service Obi-Wan anymore at all. It was really more focused on Anakin. They talked some. He talked some to different characters, supporting characters in this series that came up about how uneasy he kind of was with Anakin still, and how tenuous their relationship was, and that, hey, he didn't want to teach him, but he made a promise, so, and he didn't necessarily agree with the promise that he made to teach him, but he has grown to care for him. But again, he's saying it to someone that it was to me, a kind of poor attempt at exposition of him telling a character that we know nothing about and like explaining to him. And I think they could have played it out better or a lot better by showing the two characters interacting and maybe talking about and discussing some of the issues they had with one another, and that they actually confided in one another. You see it in Clone Wars, at points, but you don't see it in this series. And I thought that was the whole purpose behind the series. And it just felt more like Disney trying to go out of their way for people. I felt like ultimately this wasn't for a diehard fan of all Star Wars media, because if you were into the Clone Wars and you watched the Clone Wars, you got more than what you got from this series in form of that series helped Anakin so much become a fully realized 3-dimensional character, and then you understand his plight on what drove him to turn to the dark side. When we see the Revenge of the Sith, a lot happened to him to get him to that point. Where here, this is like a Cliff Notes version, an average Cliff Note version of what was done over quite a few seasons. 5 seasons on the Clone Wars television show that did it a lot better. It was condensed down. They only were given 5 issues, and they tried to do their best. And even the mission itself, being on the world and how it all played out, wasn't really compelling. I was kind of left dry at the end. Again, it's nothing against Charles Soule as a writer. I think he's a solid writer. But again, it has to be hard when dealing with the Star Wars properties when you're at Marvel and dealing with Disney, because all this stuff has to fit into a certain segment of time. So, and everything is now being filtered to really have a story group. So he probably had very little leeway to maybe go as deep as he might have wanted to go, or to explore certain things, because maybe it'll be discussed in a book or maybe in a game. So you're limited, and it has to filter through so many other people, which I would believe as a writer probably would hamper anyone's writing style, which I would say this going in. This is not a horrible read. With me being a fan of the Clone Wars series and that I felt like this was it was somewhat redundant. You saw them alone together. It kind of harkened, like if you just watch the movies, it reminds you of the scene in the elevator in the beginning of Attack of the Clones, where Anakin is going up the elevator with Obi-Wan, and they were talking about some of the adventures they've gone on. And he was like, you know, the time you fell in the pit and I went down and I jumped down to save you. And they're having that little cute conversation at the very beginning of that movie, when right before he's about to see Padme for the first time, and the 10 years that passed between episode 1 and 2. This is one of those stories. But again, the execution, just the mission they were on wasn't that exciting. What they were trying to help the people with, the people themselves, none of it was compelling at all to me, and that didn't pull me in as much as I thought it would. Like I said, the flashbacks of Anakin and Palpatine were very good, because you could see right then, before the Clone Wars even started, he knew that Anakin was someone under the proper circumstances that he could manipulate him, which led to, again, he's 5 steps ahead. He caught him very early. He watched him. They had scenes where he watched him in the Jedi Temple training. He saw that he was a step above everyone else. So everything that was there, again, and it ties more into the movies as well, where he said to Anakin, I'm going to keep a very close eye on you at the end of episode 1, at the funeral and all that. He's like, I think you're really going to have a bright future. He knew he was someone that he could manipulate. He started his training way later than what normal Jedis did. So he was acceptable to corruption just off the beginning, in the fact that he dealt with loss, being a slave, being freed, having to leave his mother behind, losing his mother, all those things, because he was, he had a lot of really bad stuff. And I think that he's, for all intents and purposes, as bad as an individual that he becomes, Anakin / Darth Vader was a very damaged person. A lot of horrible things happened to him to get him to that point. It wasn't just like one day he decided, hey, I'm going to be a bad guy. Let me put on this black helmet and I'm going to be evil. And he's twirling his mustache or something. It was like a lot of bad stuff. And then he fought a war at a very young age. And he saw a lot of friends die. Jedis, though he didn't have a lot of friends. And he stressed that too, that because of how he came into the Jedi Order, he was not liked by a lot of people. And the one thing that I really, really liked that Soule did, that he weaved in this element into the story that was never discussed and displayed anywhere else, where Anakin really at a young age, after some years of training, really considered leaving the Jedi Order before the Clone Wars even started. He really contemplated it, and, he came to terms with, because of what Qui-Gon said to him, and him losing his mother, and him wanting just to get away from Tatooine, that, it was a lot of his life was predetermined. His mom basically sacrificed to stay in slavehood to save her son and to give him a better life. But then after doing it, you realize he might want to explore more in the world instead of living a life as a Jedi, going fighting other people's battles, which I thought was very interesting, and added even an additional layer on to the depth of Anakin's character, that he did have second thoughts about the Jedi Order. It wasn't just all encompassing, yes, I want to be a Jedi. He had second thoughts about it, that he didn't have a choice in that matter. He thought he had some choice, but he was a kid that was a slave that wanted to get off a planet. Someone's like, hey, I'll take you off this planet and teach you some real cool stuff. He was like, you have to think how young he was. He was like 8 years old. Yeah, I'll go. Sure. You're going to get me off this rock and I'm not a slave anymore? Yay, me. Take me. But that he had a lot of decisions, and I'm surprised, like, when Soule, put that out there, I was kind of shocked that I was like, why didn't they ever really explore that? In the Clone Wars show, which is going to be a segue where I might do a brief review here at the end. because as I'm saying it, it parallels so greatly to what they did with Ahsoka, in all intents and purposes. If you ever watched the Clone Wars, Ahsoka Tano, which was Anakin's Padawan in the Clone Wars series, which is something that was never touched on in the movies, and now things have been fleshed out through the unreleased episodes of the Clone Wars, a couple of books. An Ahsoka book just dropped like 2 weeks ago, maybe now. Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I want to say. That clears up some of those blanks. Now you understand better why she wasn't around when the Clone Wars started. But that she had similar things. You know, she was kind of framed for a situation. It was sort of, she was just as rebellious as Anakin. So she had a few friends in the Jedi Order. But when she was framed for something, it was really easy for, maybe because she was Anakin's Padawan, and she was very similar to personality as Anakin, that it was easy for the Jedi Order to turn on her, and she fought really hard to clear her name, and she contemplated, was it really worth it? Because could she trust the people around her, because, you know, they didn't believe and trust in her. Not saying that Anakin and Obi-Wan didn't, but everyone else kind of was against her. So it kind of parallels, in seeing this now, and just me just thinking about it as I'm talking about it, it clicked that it paralleled what they kind of set up here, where you know, Anakin, because he didn't fit in, and different reasonings and how and maybe this is the Jedi Order's fault when you ultimately sit down and think about this all. Maybe it was the Jedi Order's fault that Anakin was able to be turned, because they always were kind of skeptical or felt like he was dangerous and didn't really accept him with open arms to make him feel comfortable. And it's a repetitive theme as well, because you kind of see in even Star Wars Rebels with Kanan Janus's character, Caleb, what's his name when he was a Jedi? Caleb Doom. That he was kind of, because he was very inquisitive and asked a lot of questions, that other Jedi's kind of younglings, when he was going through his training, picked on him and made fun of him because he was so inquisitive and he asked so many questions. So you see a lot of that within the Jedi Order, which caused people to go down greatly different paths, that it wasn't everything it was cracked up to be being a Jedi, is what I'm saying. Is that, yeah, we fantasize about, oh, being a Jedi was so cool, but going through the training and the traditional method that the path that they had to go through from being a very young child on, we've seen multiple examples. I just gave you Anakin as an example, Kanan, or Caleb at the time, which he was known for, which they explore the things I'm talking about in the short-lived, I think it was only 12 issues, Kanan, The Last Padawan. They explore this. And if you've ever watched the Clone Wars television show, as well, the 3 examples of where Jedis weren't always that nice, or at least younglings weren't that nice to other younglings that were going through training, that could have, you know, pushed them in a different route because they didn't feel accepted or a part of the Order because of these things. So that's very interesting when you kind of break all that down. But ultimately, this is a solid series. I would give it, you know, the story and concept, I would give a 6 out of 10. The writing was a 7 out of 10. I think Charles Soule did the best he could with what he was given, because this part was, he didn't have much room to play around with at the time this series was set. But it was solid writing. I think Marco Checheco's artwork was a 9 out of 10. So the bottom line rating I would give for this is a 7 out of 10. It's a good read. It's a good, solid read. It doesn't unearth a whole bunch of new stuff, but if you're just a fan of Obi-Wan and Anakin, and seeing them on an adventure, which we didn't get to see because they jumped 10 or 11 years. I can't remember how many years they jumped between. I want to say it's like 10 years. I think he says that in the elevator, that it's been like 10 years since he last seen her. You didn't get to see them away from the overarching backdrop of the Clone Wars to see them out on a mission working together. So it's cool seeing it here, but it just didn't pay off as much as I personally wanted to, being invested in a relationship, and hopefully was hoping to see something different that we already hadn't seen. For that, it was kind of a potential letdown for me, but it wasn't horrible. But I still enjoyed the read. It was worth what I paid for it. It wasn't like, oh gosh, this is horrible. It was just solid. It was solid. It was a solid, good read that I would have on my shelf. When I go back and reread this story, no, but I don't feel any less for reading it at the same time. I felt like it wasted my time either. So definitely would say it was a good read. 7 out of 10, good read, worth picking up. Again, you can get it for under $10 on InStockTrades.com. That's all the mini review that I kind of wanted to throw in here because it's related. The Ahsoka book is called Just Ahsoka. If you're a fan of the Clone Wars and you know of the Ahsoka Tano character, they just put out a book. It's not a super long book. It was my first audiobook experience that I had. I had credit on Audible, so I checked it out. I did the free trial because I wanted to check it out. I've heard a lot of my friends that do a lot of reading, rave on Audible and, stuff. And I try to read books. I read comics. I like the pictures. I'm a tech nerd, so I read a lot of manuals and tech magazines and tech books. So it has gotten to the point I used to love to read as a kid, and it's like I can read now, but it's just different because what I read is very specific, and I can jump around and I can study that. So when it comes to something, reading a book, and I'm forced to follow that, you read this page, you flip the page and read this one, like it loses me. So audiobooks, I think, are a good alternative for me. They actually had the actress do the voice, do the reading of the book, which was awesome. It was like about 7 hours. So over the not this weekend, but the previous weekend, I just sat down and listened to it like while I was playing video games and stuff. I would have it playing, and it was very an immersive experience. I really enjoyed it. I think it added an extra oomph to me because I really grew to love the character. And then having the actress do the reading of it and then doing the parts in Ahsoka voices. And she had to do a couple of other voices, which was kind of comical. But it really is cool. And if, like I said, if you're a fan, this book covers the time period between you find out what happens from the time she leaves the Jedi Order. Spoilers if you haven't watched the Clone Wars, to where we see her later in life in Star Wars Rebels. So that's all I'm going to say. It's in that blank space of time for her. It fills in a lot of those blocks on her journey from the time we see her on that episode walking down the stairs of the Jedi Temple and the sun setting as she's walking off when we last see her in the Clone Wars show. So I think it's kind of cool seeing that. And I hope this is the first of many books because there's still a lot of stories that can be told from that time period. We didn't get everything on it that happened, but that's the gap of time that it happens, and it sets her character up from when she reemerges in Star Wars Rebels, exactly how she got involved in everything that she's tied into there, which is really, really cool, and it really, really worked well. I hope this book does well. If you are into the Ahsoka character, check out Audible, or if you want to just buy the book, the regular book, or buy a Kindle version of it, check out Amazon.com. Do a search for Ahsoka. I might put links in the show notes for that as well. And that's all I have for you guys. So that was just really good as being a Star Wars fan and being an Ahsoka fan, having that. It just kind of related to this because we're talking about Anakin, that I related to it. So I just threw that in there as an extra tidbit. I would have to say for that book, if I had to give it a review, I would probably have to say that if you're a Clone Wars fan and you like Ahsoka, it's a must buy. If you don't like Ahsoka at all, then you might want to skip it. It all depends, because she was a polarizing character. Some people didn't like her. I loved she grew on me. I didn't care for her when she was first introduced in the Clone Wars movie. But as the show went on, they really developed her, and she was one of my favorite characters by the time the Clone Wars series ended. So it was a must buy for me, as I said, and I really loved it. And that's something I would go back and listen to again. That story was just really, really good. And I hope maybe someday that we can get an Ahsoka Tano live action anthology movie maybe down the road. But again, that's all I have for you guys this week. Again, as always, if you have a moment, check out InStockTrades.com. That really helps me out. That helps support the show. You can follow me on all social media at Comic Book Savant. And as always, the website, comicbooksavant.com. So if you want to email me, it's comicbooksavant@gmail.com, or you can just go to the website. And if you click on the envelope, it's the contact me page. You can email me right from the website as well. So you can either that or comicbooksavant@gmail.com. Either one works. That's all I have. I will see you guys next week for another episode of Comic Book Savant. Take care.
And into lyrical wholeness. And I know this, and I know this. This I know, this I know.